Larry who? Never heard of her.
What sort of a man is he?
Chick from Bama.
A man like any other, but more so.
Well, I thought he was dead.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show. Let's light this candle.
Light this candle indeed. Welcome to the Larry Alex Taunton Show. It's great to be with you on this beautiful day, at least where I am. We don't have any video today because I'm calling in from outside of the country. Eventually, by the way, this show will be aired on NRB. You can find that on DirecTV. I don't know if it's on Dish or one of those other networks or not, but you'll find it there. You'll also find it, on our website at LarryAlexTaunton.com and a variety of other places. Since the pandemic began, I have been in, I think, 12 countries. In fact, I was quite literally in the Sahara Desert with Bedouins when this whole thing really started ramping up, the pandemic. And it was very interesting to me because here I am on a continent and in a country where so many people die such early, unnatural, and unhappy deaths. But because all these Bedouins, they had cell phones, they were watching CNN and BBC, and it was fascinating and disconcerting to me to see how quickly they could be stirred into great fear over the pandemic. So, here you are literally riding a camel out in the Sahara Desert, but you're wearing a mask. Now, I want you to picture this with me, just how insane, this is. To say nothing of the fact that nearly 1 million Africans die every year of malaria. This is to say nothing of civil war, of dysentery, of loads of other diseases, violent crime, all of these terrible ways that a person can die. If there was a movie, what was something like so many ways you could die in LA. Well, there's a lot of bad ways that you can die in Africa. But because they had cell phones, they were all terrified of the pandemic. Anyway, from Egypt, I was in Morocco. I was all over Europe. I was in, I was in France. I was in Portugal. I was in the UK. By the time I got to France and the UK, everything was dead. I mean, complete lockdowns, almost nothing going on. I was stuck. Lori and I were stuck in Spain for quite some time. She'd come over to meet me there, and then we ended up being, stuck in the country for a time because they went into lockdowns and flights were being canceled and this kind of thing. Eventually, we got back to the United States, and since then, I've also been all over South America and elsewhere. Now, this is all throughout the pandemic. Now, I'm telling you that for a simple reason, and that is this, that the great unreported story of the pandemic of the last couple of years is the suffering of common people around the world. Many Americans are wholly unaware of this, and often many Christians are because they're very insulated from it economically. Meaning, if you're a guy who has an automatic deposit and you can work at home, I mean, what do you care? Everything maybe just continues to go along from your point of view, and everything seems fine. But I'm really quite startled by the lack of concern for just ordinary people. I believe the protest that we saw of the truckers in Ottawa, the truckers who drove to D.C. and were kind of forgotten because of everything that's happening in Ukraine. These peaceful protests were efforts by common people in the United States. They tend to be red staters who are expressing incredible concern about their jobs, the economy, COVID passports, efforts to surveil them in their daily life and just about everything, a loss of freedoms as a result of the pandemic. I mean, everybody that I know who thought that lockdowns made sense, and they never made sense. We now know this. You're increasingly having, epidemiologists, other researchers, scientists who are finding their voice, and they're willing to come out and say this didn't do any good. Just like the masks. I mean, it's just a way of signaling your virtue. It's a kind of secular righteousness. It's a way of saying I'm a good person because I do this. Maybe there are self-righteous Christians who display it by not doing, particular things. Well, secular people do the very same things. There's a religious streak in us all, a self-righteous streak in us all, and it finds expression in different ways. And so, maybe where the Christian may say, well, I don't wear dresses like this, or I don't drink, or I don't smoke, or I don't go to rated R movies as a sign of my righteousness. The secular type may say, well, I recycle. I'm in favor of social justice, and I wear a mask, and I'm in favor of government lockdowns and this kind of thing. So I wanted to go around the world, to different parts of the world. I didn't literally go around the world. I did to write my last book, Around the World in More Than 80 Days, but haven't done that, since the pandemic. But I have been, as I say, roughly a dozen countries. It's maybe more, maybe one or two less, to see what's happening with ordinary people. And what you see is absolute devastation, economic devastation that is leading to a global catastrophe for ordinary people. So many people have managed to climb out of abject poverty into something not as bad as that. I won't say a middle class, but by American standards, certainly not a middle class, but out of abject poverty in the third world into something slightly better, only to be knocked right back down into it. And I would suggest to you that this problem isn't millions, it's billions of people. And it's not being reported. And that's because, the Beltway types, the people that you are hearing typically on the news, that you're hearing on the radio, that you're hearing in your pulpit very frequently, just simply are so insulated from it, so far from it, they have no idea. Now, one of the things that we like to say that we do at Fixed Point Foundation, the tagline, for my own brand, LarryAlexTaunton.com, is that I'm your man in the field. And what I mean by that is I'm not simply pontificating from CNN headquarters in DC or in Atlanta, or from inside the Beltway, or from Manhattan, where you have really no idea what the real world is like. I don't think Nancy Pelosi has any idea. I don't think Joe Biden, both lifelong politicians, have any clue what life is like for average Americans. I don't think they know what it's like to stand in line. I don't think they know what it's like to be in an honest to goodness traffic jam. I don't think they know what it's like to ride public transportation, to be searched at the airport, any of this. They just don't have a clue. To fear for their own jobs, their own livelihoods, for their own children, or even to be subject to the laws that they would so casually pass. I mean, these are the same people who have locked away, as if there's a suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, the so-called insurrectionists of January 6th, without trial, by the way. They've been locked away for 14 months. And Jesse Smollett, who endeavored to incite hate among an entire country, served a few days in jail, and now he's back out again. So, this is where we find ourselves. But I just want to put an emphasis on the fact that ordinary people, common people, both in the United States and all over the world, are suffering terribly in some cases as a result of policies that have locked down, lock them into their own homes, supposedly for their own safety, which is complete nonsense. And that often led to the loss of their jobs, of their businesses. I've listened to story after story of people in South America, in Africa, in Europe, and in the United States, of people who were desperate for an income because they were in service industries. Maybe they were a waiter. Maybe they were in the tourist industry. Maybe they were a bus driver. Maybe they were a taxi driver. Maybe they worked in the hotel industry. And suddenly those businesses lost everything because people weren't allowed out, or because, people were fearful because media had stirred such hysteria over all of this. And again, if you're somebody who doesn't get out enough and rubbing elbows with just ordinary people, you're kind of clueless about all of this. And we really make a point at Fixed Point Foundation. I make a point in my own work of engaging with people from, various ranks of society. Yes, I might find myself, doing an event at a university or in some beautiful location. But at the same time, we make a point of engaging with just regular people in the third world as well. And it gives you a very different perspective. I wish that I could take many of our congressmen on both sides of the aisle and many of our people in media and just show them what the real world is like that they're missing, because there's a place in which they're just quite clueless about all of it. I moved from that to the Russo-Ukrainian war. Since the podcast that we put out, the very first podcast just a few days ago, still relevant, by the way. You can still go and listen to that. You can find it on Rumble, on YouTube, on Apple, podcasts. You can find it there. You can, of course, certainly find it on our website. But there's been just a few more things that have happened since that time. I have a piece out today in the Daily Wire, and it's called "Is Putin Crazy?" Or I think they give it a slightly different title. Putin is crazy, like all of America's enemies, and that's an outgrowth of the very first podcast that we produced just a few days ago. You can find that at Daily Wire. I think you could probably find a link to it from our own website. Unfortunately, they put it behind a paywall, but I think you only have to pay 99 cents or something like that for it. And I don't know how their subscription works, but just know that it's not behind. We didn't put it behind a paywall. They did that. But something that I'm noticing now, that the way the public conversation has changed every day, is it's becoming mob-like hysteria. I mean, if you express on social media even mild caution about involvement in a war between Russia and Ukraine, you're going to be shouted down as a Putin propagandist. I keep being called a Putin propagandist by people who see all of this strictly in terms of black and white. Strictly in terms of black and white. There is no nuance. There's nothing here to be discussed. There's nothing here to be evaluated. There's no caution. It's just a headlong push into war. The fascinating thing to me about it is that it's largely being driven, though not exclusively. There are many people on the right. I mean, PragerU, sounds to me like Dennis Prager and PragerU, who I've invited to conversation, by the way, about this, seem to me to be following this same path. There are others, who are Blaze. The people at the Blaze seem to me there's quite a few people over there who are pushing in this same direction. So I want to talk just a little bit about this. To express concern over the possibility that we could end up in World War III does not make you a Putin propagandist or a Putin supporter, which I certainly, am not. One of the funnier accusations that's been made against me recently is that you have had people on, social media saying, you're an employee of Fox News. I see that you work for Fox News. What's funny about that is I have done a lot of work for a lot of networks. I've been on Al Jazeera. I've been on BBC. I've been on MSNBC, which is about as far to the left as you can get. I have been on NPR. I've been on Al Jazeera. I've been on CNN International. I've been on CNN. I've been on CNN far more than I've ever been on Fox. And I actually enjoy my work for CNN more than I ever did for Fox. But I want to be clear on this particular point. I've never been paid a dime, not a dime, by any of them. I am not a Fox employee, a Fox News employee. Furthermore, and I probably shouldn't say this publicly, I don't watch Fox News. I don't watch CNN. I don't watch any of them because I find that for the most part, I will watch clips of shows here and there that I do find helpful. I like Tucker Carlson. I think Tucker Carlson has a very good read on the situation. But to suggest that I'm some kind of employee, and see, this is what people do, is that they automatically try to put you into a box. You say something they don't like, and they go, aha, well, this means that you're a Trumpist, or you're this, or you're that. They want to label you. I voted for Trump. I don't agree 100% with everything Donald Trump does. I have not paid attention to his position on everything that's happening in this, and that's because I think for myself. So I don't. I listen to a variety of sources. I read a variety of sources, and I form my own opinion. So those kinds of accusations are just silly accusations. But two things can be true here, and they are, by the way. The Ukrainian people, not their government, by the way, but the Ukrainian people can be victims, and Vladimir Putin can also be wicked. Both are true. And there's a third that's true. The Ukrainian government is corrupt as it can be. Every bit as corrupt as the Russian government. These are not, Ukraine is not the ally we need, and Russia is not the enemy that we want. And I think engaging ourselves in this war is very foolish and could easily slide into World War III. And a question that nobody seems to be asking is, what about China? I keep seeing people saying, we've isolated Russia. Russia's isolated. Now, that kind of strategy is what you come up with when you're a millennial, when your advisors are millennials, and the idea of your credit card not working at Starbucks terrifies you. The Russians are not going to be defeated because you seek to use the cancel culture with them. They just simply won't. Almost half the casualties in World War II, roughly 55 million people, almost half of that 55 million were Russian casualties. The Russians lost more people in the battle for Leningrad, modern-day St. Petersburg, than we lost in the entire war. Now think about that for a moment. They lost more people in a battle for a single city than we lost in the entire war. In World War II, they did not have enough weapons. So do you know what they did? They would send groups of men, charging across a battlefield, say maybe a couple of them without weapons, and they would tell them to pick up the weapon of the dead man in front of him. When he gets shot, you pick up his rifle and you keep going. And then when he gets shot, number 3, you pick up the weapon and you keep going. These are people who are going to scare very easily. So that's worth bearing in mind. The Russian people know suffering, and they're a deeply patriotic people. And I don't think canceling, their Amazon and Netflix memberships are going to be sufficient. But I also don't agree with the narrative that suggests that they're that cut off, and that is because they are backed to the hilt by China. I believe that what we are seeing between Russia and China is comparable to the always gone out of my head in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. just a reminder of your history prior to World War II beginning in September 1st of 1939. Russia signed a 10-year non-aggression pact with Germany. That is to say, Stalin and Hitler entered into an agreement with one another. Now, this was utterly shocking to the West, to the Western powers, because they were sure that as Germany's power was, rising and becoming more threatening, that Stalin would want to align himself with France and Britain, because he would want to seek alliance with other countries that were also likewise being threatened by Germany. Well, that isn't what he did. Instead, his foreign minister, Molotov, and Germany's foreign minister, Ribbentrop, entered into negotiations, and they signed a 10-year non-aggression pact in 1939, and that shocked the Western powers. It utterly shocked them. And see, what Hitler was seeking to do by doing this was to neutralize Russia. He did not want to be in a two-front war. He didn't want to have to fight Russia on the one hand and France and Britain on the other. So the two of them agreed that they would divide Poland, which they did, and then Hitler invaded, May 10 of 1940. Shortly after this agreement was signed, he invaded France, and in 46 days, France was defeated. And then, of course, he turned right around, and much to Stalin's shock, it's interesting. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the novelist, in his novel The First Circle, he has a great line in there, and I'm only paraphrasing it. I can't recall its exact words, but he's talking about Stalin, and he says, Stalin, a man who never trusted anyone. He didn't trust the God to whom he was forced to bow in seminary. He didn't trust his mother and father. He didn't trust any of the old Bolsheviks. He didn't trust Lenin. He didn't trust his wife. He didn't trust his children. And yet, while the whole world watched, he trusted one man and one man alone. And that man was Adolf Hitler. It's a great passage in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's novel, The First Circle. Solzhenitsyn, Russian dissident who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. But anyway, he did trust him, and so he was absolutely shocked when that invasion came. Well, what does that have to do with the present time? I think we're seeing something fairly similar now, in that Russia and China, Putin and Xi, have kind of signed their own non-aggression pacts. I think it's a quid pro quo. Xi has agreed to back Putin in Russia. This is why they're not, by the way, isolated. They're getting supplied by the Chinese, and I think that the quid pro quo looks something like this: we'll support you with your invasion of Ukraine. We'll look the other way. We'll support you on the in the United Nations, and we'll support you in the court of public opinion. And then you'll do the same for us when we take Taiwan. Now, I'm making a prediction here. I'm not alone in making this prediction, but I believe we're going to see the Chinese move on Taiwan. The same kind of saber rattling that we have been hearing for quite some time out of Putin before his invasion of Ukraine is the same thing that we've been seeing for decades, by the way, out of the Chinese towards Taiwan. And what would the United States do for the Taiwanese? I dare say nothing. We did nothing about Hong Kong. What a wonderful city Hong Kong was. I was there as all this was beginning, and so tragic to see that city, a democratic city, a city with such strong freedom impulses, crushed under the jackboots of the Chinese. And I think they're going to do the same thing to Taiwan, but they have kind of an agreement between each other. And So this idea that Putin is somehow, he's surrounded, he's cut off from the world, I guess because he can't access his Netflix account, is going to really scare him off and going to defeat him in Ukraine. I don't think so. I think that Ukraine is effectively crushed already. But what is the concern? I say that, that I'm expressing great concern. I'm expressing great concern over the fact that there's a rush towards war. One of the worst on social media that I've seen is former Congressman and presidential candidate Joe Walsh. Not to be confused, by the way, with the Joe Walsh of the Eagles. I have no idea if former Congressman Walsh can play the guitar. I don't know if he sings Hotel California in the shower or not, but I will tell you this. He's not to be confused with the guy who, lives in hotels and tears out the walls and has accountants who pay for it all. Not the same guy. Joe Walsh came across my Twitter feed because somebody was responding to him or, had retweeted him. I don't recall, but I started, watching some of the things that he was saying. And in one of his tweets, this is what he says. He says, Zelensky good, Putin bad, Ukraine good, Russia bad. So I decided to engage him. Now, bear in mind, I've got, 15, 20,000 Twitter followers. I'm not a heavyweight on social media. Former congressman here, I don't know, 200, 300,000 followers. And often one of the underhanded tactics of people like this is when they can't really respond to you with a clear, rational argument, they just serve you up to their followers. I don't know, how it works on other platforms like Facebook and Instagram. But that's the way it works on Twitter, so that I can just simply retweet you to my followers and let them maul you, for instance. And this is what people like this do. This is what David Frum does. This is what many of these people on the left do. They just call you names or let their followers do that for you. And I was expecting that, from him. I'm used to being called names. I'm used to being attacked. Not my first rodeo. But I decided to just persist and try to engage him in a rational conversation for the simple reason that a guy like this is misusing his platform to stir war hysteria. So I asked a simple question. Have you ever been in either country? He avoided the question. He did engage me in some back and forth on Twitter, but he never answered that question, which to me is the answer. If he could offer that authority, I think he would. And the answer is, no, he hasn't. So he doesn't really know anything about Ukraine. He doesn't really know anything about Russia, about either country. And I dare say 3 weeks ago, many of you who are listening, but certainly many of these people who are on social media, who are spouting their opinions so vociferously and who are now sporting the Ukrainian flag. It's the new, by the way, virtue, sign. It's not the mask anymore. It's the Ukrainian flag. I heard this morning while I was listening to sports radio, I went to a commercial and some symphony, I don't remember, whose symphony orchestra it was, as having a big benefit concert, to support Ukraine. I'd be interested to know where that money's going. I hope it's going to the orphanages of Ukraine. I hope it's going to the poor people of Ukraine. I hope it's going to refugees of this war, to the common Ukrainian people. I hope it's not going to anybody in government. I hope it's not going to any of the elites, because they don't deserve it. And I'll come back to that for just a moment. But, I wonder, 3 weeks ago, how many of these people who are now calling for war could have found Ukraine on a map? How many of them had ever heard of Zelensky? How many of them knew anything about Russia, about Ukraine? And they're all now hailing Ukraine as some kind of beacon of virtue, of democracy, of freedom. One woman said to me on Twitter, after calling me a number of vile names, she said that Ukraine is the world. It is democracy, the embodiment of democracy. No, it isn't. I've been there. I've been there many times. I've been in both of these countries roughly a dozen times, and they are just as corrupt as they can possibly be. These are two mafias that are at war with one another. And again, Putin is an evil man. I can't claim to know a great deal about Zelensky. I can claim to know something about his government, and his government is corrupt to its core, to its black-hearted core. The Ukraine is not a great country. It's a pretty crappy country. Russia is too. Both of them are. And freedom, as we know it in the West, is alien to both of those countries. And all the people who are calling for these things, who are, demanding no-fly zones, which, by the way, would spark World War III. And it won't be these people. It won't be Congressman, Joe Walsh, not of the Eagles, who will be fighting this war. Probably not his children. I don't know if he has any, but they'll probably end up with some, soft position like John Kerry got and like Al Gore got. No, it'll be your children. It'll be my children. As Jean-Paul Sartre put it, when rich people go to the war, it's the poor people who die. And that's what will happen. And be very clear on this, ladies and gentlemen. A world war with Russia, it will dwarf Vietnam, Korea, the wars in Afghanistan, the Persian Gulf, the Middle East. It will dwarf all of that. And I come back to China. Do you think China is really going to be doing nothing while the United States and Russia are at war with one another, which would mean, of course, a general European war, possibly a nuclear war? Do you think China is doing nothing? I think China becomes the only potential winner of a war like that. If this is a chessboard, it's like China is that queen that is sitting across the board that has been forgotten, but is an ominous presence that will make itself felt at the right time. To mix my metaphors here, and they're watching all of this like vultures, ready to pick clean the bones of both sides in a U.S.-Russia war, where there's no winners except potentially, as I say, the Chinese. And I guess maybe it's just been so long since we've experienced a world war that some people are kind of excited about the possibility of it. I recall my son Zachary saying to me that he felt like his generation wanted to live an Instagrammable movie-like life, that they're ready to take selfies on the battlefields. They're ready to post to their Instagram accounts, their heroic deeds and the things that they're doing. I regret that there are not more veterans of the Second World War still alive to offer warning and caution. Unless I sound here like a pacifist, I'm not. I'm a child of the military. My father was a career soldier. I definitely believe. My life, my career is spent fighting for things that I believe in. But I don't believe in rushing in headlong into a world war willy-nilly, and definitely not for Ukraine. Definitely not for Ukraine. As I pointed out in the previous show, Ukraine, their government, not only is their government corrupt, but their government has behaved extremely foolishly. The United States sparked this war. We provoked it. Putin invaded, yes, he officially started it. But when we decided to engage very actively in Ukrainian politics, engineer a coup d'etat in that government to topple a pro-Russian government for a pro-American government, when we invited Ukraine to join NATO, Putin here sees himself as acting defensively. He simply is not willing to have a country that he considers vital, that, by the way, Russian rulers, since time immemorial, have considered Russia as utterly vital to their survival. Words and phrases like, like breadbasket and warm water port appear repeatedly in Russian history. Catherine the Great referred to Ukraine as Little Russia. No less than 16% of Ukrainians want to rejoin with Russia. They share an awful lot in common culturally. Their political cultures definitely share a lot in common, extremely, extremely corrupt. And I don't think that the United States wants to engage in this. And I think if we did, we would discover very quickly, that this isn't what the media and our government leaders would have us believe, that Ukraine is not what we've been led to believe. Let me use an example. The JFK, John F. Kennedy administration, he had decided that America needed a place to demonstrate its power. We had bought into George Kennan's theory called the domino theory, this idea that communism bleeds into one country after another, and those countries fall like dominoes, and eventually it would engulf the world, and it would encircle the United States. You'll recall those videos, as those of you who are older, that the documentaries that we saw again and again, that showed a map, and it showed communism bleeding into one country after another. So that was the domino theory, and that we needed to stop communism from knocking, over one domino, one country after another. So Kennedy had decided that Vietnam was the place to demonstrate America's, power. So we play a role in installing the very corrupt Catholic president's no din diem. And, South Vietnam, not a Catholic country. Kennedy, of course, was, and we thought, this is our guy, we're going to get behind him. And so the Kennedy administration, assisted by the media, fed the American public this image of South Vietnam as the beacon of freedom, of enlightenment, of democracy. Now, exactly like what we're seeing, people are being fed about Ukraine. The problem was it wasn't true. But Americans didn't know anything about Vietnam other than what they were being told, by their media, by their leaders. And so Americans bought that narrative. They believed it, that the South Vietnamese people needed to be saved by us because they were true blue, Democrats to their core. Now, culturally, we shared nothing in common with Vietnam, nothing at all. And we did not understand the Vietnamese mind. We did not understand their history. We did not understand their culture, not even a little bit. But, okay, this is the line that the American people were fed. Well, in 1963, I believe it was, I think it was in June of 1963, just months before Kennedy's assassination, a Buddhist monk, famously, infamously, some of you have seen these images. If not, you can, do an internet search and, find it very quickly. A Buddhist monk went into the streets of Saigon, into a busy intersection. Media was there ready to capture the moment. He sat down very calmly in the street. He dumped gasoline all over himself, and he immolated himself right there. And the media captured it in film, and those images were front page all over the Western world, shocking people in the West. Why would a man do this? How and why would he do such a thing as this? Well, again, it's an indicator of how little we understood who these people were and their thinking. But Kennedy, true story, Kennedy, horrified by the act of this man, asked his own advisors, why would he do that? And they said, well, he's a Buddhist monk and he's protesting South Vietnam's President No Dinh Diem's pro-Catholic, anti-Buddhist laws. Laws, by the way, that we helped institute in South Vietnam. JFK's own administration had helped institute those laws, and they were very discriminatory towards Buddhists. So this man was protesting that. Now, Kennedy had no idea until that moment that roughly 70% of South Vietnam's population was Buddhist. No idea. Yet in spite of his ignorance, he had already committed the United States to a long, costly, and bloody war. My own father, who had already served in one war, was sent over as part of the first wave of quote-unquote military advisors to South Vietnam. A job, by the way, that he hated. And he hated it, A, because he had no authority. All he could do was advise. I wouldn't do that. I would do this, this kind of thing. Secondly, he hated it because he felt that the South Vietnamese were corrupt. Their military was corrupt and that they were extremely unprofessional soldiers. Moreover, he saw them torture prisoners on more than one occasion, but he was powerless to do anything about it. All the while, our media was portraying the South Vietnamese. Now, this narrative would change over time as the American people became tired of that war and as the truth began trickling out, and then there were war demonstrations and this kind of thing. But initially, the American public was fed this line about what a noble character No Dinh Diem was. Eventually, by the way, CIA would assist in his overthrow. And, this is the way wars begin. And all I'm trying to say here to our listeners is this. This isn't, I'm not being pro-Putin. I'm not being pro-Russia. Russia's a deeply corrupt country with a sinister history. But so is Ukraine. And if you're buying into this narrative that Ukraine is wonderful, that their government is wonderful, you are clueless about what you're talking about. Don't go around posting crap like that on social media. It's a lie. It isn't true. And we can very easily find ourselves in big, big trouble if we continue going down this road. I want to end by telling you an interesting little story about some of the kind of people who are calling for this. Now bear in mind that many of them, they're not exclusively on the left, by the way. They're not exclusively Democrats who keep pushing us in the direction of war, beating the war drums. There are loads of Republicans who are doing this too. Lindsey Graham is one of them. Marco Rubio is another. In fact, I dare say that Republicans and Democrats are more united than they have been in many, many years, because, this is, if I really wanted to build a social media following, I would just do what Congressman Joe Walsh does and just throw, red meat. I just pander, to my followers. I just tell them what they want to hear. Ukraine good, Russia bad, Zelensky good, Putin bad. I mean, this is the kind of complete nonsense that's being put out there that suggests this is, all black and white. It is not. What's interesting to me is that how many progressives, the very people who would lock you down for your own good, by the way, and insist you wear a mask that we know doesn't do a thing for you, for your own good, who would close your business for your own good, who would have you go around with a COVID passport, a China virus passport, to allow you to get on a plane or enter a restaurant or or even have a job. These are people now who are screaming for war. I mean, they're so excited about war. And I'm reminded of a photograph. I've posted this on my social media, taken in August of, I guess it must have been September, maybe late August of 1914. It's a picture in Munich. It's a picture in Munich that's taken from a building down on a crowd, and it shows a joyous, ecstatic crowd at the announcement of the beginning of what would become World War I. They're shouting for joy at this, and in the crowd is a very young Adolf Hitler, and the look on his face is a face of ecstasy. It's a face of ecstasy. And these days, gosh, it feels like we're repeating this all over again, and that, some of the people on social media need to go and look at that picture and look for themselves in that crowd. But the little story I want to tell you is that recently I was in a hotel, working. It was at night. There was almost no one around. And the hotel restaurant was pretty empty. Almost entirely empty. And I go like that, just like that, a little, throat clearing, a cough. And a guy from across the restaurant, about 50 feet away, shouts at me, "Cover your effing mouth, you effing piece of S." Now, I had not seen him there before. I had not engaged with him. He didn't know me from anyone. And he was an American, which, had surprised me. But of course, I was most greatly surprised to be, verbally assaulted by a man who's nowhere near me. And then he starts ranting about, we're in a global effing pandemic, you effing. And I can't even, I don't even know how to say the next word abbreviated for you. But it was one vile profanity out of after another, just pouring out of his mouth at me with such hostility, and he didn't even know me. And I asked him, you're that afraid? You're sitting all the way across the restaurant from me. You don't even know me, but you're that frightened you're going to get something, from me. Of course, I'd just been tested for COVID because I couldn't even leave, the country or enter that country without having a PCR test. But it didn't matter. There was no reasoning with this fellow, and he continued to shout. I did respond, and I responded vigorously, but I won't go into that. I don't respond well to bullies, and I won't be bullied. And he left with his friends, who said nothing. Now, here's what's interesting to me about that little story. I am quite certain, given his behavior and the things that he was shouting at me, he sees himself as virtuous. He sees himself as virtuous, and yet he's utterly full of hate for his fellow man. I had done nothing to offend him. I had not had an interaction with him of any kind. He doesn't know me at all, but he begins just shouting abuse after abuse of those vile kind, because I don't know, he's from some blue state where perhaps people get away with doing things like that. Where I'm from, that sort of thing can get you into real trouble. And by that I mean fisticuffs. I was ready to drag this guy outside and beat him to a pulp. But I'm just thinking, how do you somehow rationalize in your own mind that you arrive at a place where you're sure you're a very good and virtuous person because you care about humanity? But the fact is, your heart is full of hate. And this is the kind of thing that we're seeing poured out towards all things Russian right now. A concert, was canceled for Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky predated the Russian Revolution. Tchaikovsky had absolutely nothing to do with Bolsheviks, with Putin, with the invasion of Ukraine. But hey, okay, we'll hate Tchaikovsky now. I've seen all kinds of things being said similarly about we're canceling Russian literature. I would want to say if you had ever bothered to read, say, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, you might have avoided being where we are right now because they predicted these kinds of things. But the hate that you're seeing being directed towards our fellow man is quite alarming. It's quite astonishing. And these are the same people, by the way, who are calling for reparations for slaves. They're the same people who are wondering how we ended up with Japanese internment camps in World War II. Well, this is how. This is the way that happened. Because of this kind of hateful behavior where you can only see things in black and white, where your assumption is when the media points you in a direction and tells you to hate someone, you immediately and unreservedly and gleefully do so. So that the man in the restaurant, he hates me because in his mind, I'm I'm an enemy of the people. I'm a non-mask wearing super spreader to him, and this is the the place where he's arrived. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll end there. I do want to say this very quickly. We will have joining the show with us soon at an event with Dr. Jay Smith. Dr. Jay Smith. Some of you who have followed my work for a while will know Jay Smith. Jay is an Islamic, it's tough to get that out of my mouth, an Islamic expert. And what is also being forgotten in all of this that's going on is Islam, which is a rising global threat and an increasing threat in the West. Jay, for 24 years, took on radicals in London, one of the most radicalized cities on the planet. And Jay is going to be here with us in a couple of weeks. We're going to get him on the podcast, but you'll also have the opportunity to hear him in person, and I'm pretty excited about that. But we hope you'll keep listening to the show, and it has been a pleasure to be with you. And so now I will turn it over to Dandy Don Meredith, who will sing for us, Turn Out the Lights, the party's over.
Turn out the lights, the party's over. They say that all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful for the standing ovation, but there will be no encore for today's performance. Please exit the building in an orderly fashion. Thank you.
Honey, can we leave now?